Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a really interesting look inside Japanese high schools.
hmm
Our source is a book from the Nissan Institute Routledge Japanese Studies series. Now, this series, it's generally known for giving a pretty balanced view of Japan institutions, practices, ideas.
Right. And this specific book offers quite a critical perspective on the Japanese high school system. It pushes back against some of the more common views.
Yeah, the ones that often credit the education system for Japan's economic success, that functionalist view.
Exactly. Instead of focusing only on that, this book really digs into the potential negative impacts.
Yeah.
It asks, what are the effects of these authoritarian hierarchies, the really strict rules, on the students
On
themselves?
their well-being, their development.
Yeah, their morale, intellectual growth, mental health, the whole package.
And to really get a handle on how unique or maybe how extreme some aspects are, the book uses Australia as a comparison, right?
That's right. Australia representing a more, let's say, Western-style liberal education system. It helps highlight the level of regimentation in the Japanese schools.
Okay. So, our mission today, learner, is to unpack the core arguments here. We want to get some real insights into what it's like for students in Japanese high schools, especially compared to Australia, and try to move past maybe some outdated stereotypes.
And the book starts, well, it starts in a really jarring place. The 1997 Kobe murder by a 14-year-old, dubbed the school killer.
Wow, yeah. That event really shook Japanese society, didn't it? The book draws a parallel to the anxiety caused by the Kobe earthquake, even.
It does. It suggests there was this unsettling sense of familiarity about the crime, that it wasn't just some random terrible act, but maybe reflected deeper systemic issues.
Issues within schools, families, maybe society as a whole.
Precisely. It wasn't like a natural disaster. It felt like something potentially symptomatic of the environment kids were growing up in.
So this awful event kind of sets the stage for the book's main argument then, that beneath the orderly surface.
Yeah, that beneath the surface of achievement and order, there are these significant pressures, potential alienation. It's a tough starting point, but it frames the critique.
Can you give us some of the specifics about the perpetrator? The book details some background.
It does, and it's disturbing. He'd apparently hit an intellectually handicapped child, quote, just for fun. And the victim, Jun, was known to be a target of something called puroresu goko.
Which is like playing at pro wrestling.
Sort of, yeah, but
Mhm.
in this context, it was clearly bullying, what they call ijime,
And the things the perpetrator reportedly said later, they're quite chilling.
extremely. Things like anybody weak would have become the target. And he spoke about developing a fantasy of killing people while killing and dissecting small animals.
It just paints a picture of deep alienation and, frankly, a terrifying mindset.
And the judge pointed out this sort of self-justification he developed, that being stronger gave him the right to control and even kill others. It's an extreme case, obviously, but the book uses it to illustrate a potential breaking point.
A breaking point related to feeling powerless or alienated within that school environment.
Exactly. It forces you to ask, what pressures exist in this seemingly orderly system that could contribute, even indirectly, to such outcomes?
Okay, so that leads us directly into the book's critique of the functionalist paradigm, as it calls it.
Yeah, for a long time, the main story about Japanese education, especially in English, was overwhelmingly positive, wasn't it?
Definitely. You think of scholars like Reischauer, Vogel, Roland, Duke, White. They often highlighted the success, right? Academic competence, orderliness.
And linked it directly to Japan's modernization and economic boom. The idea was basically the schools produced the workforce that built modern Japan.
A very neat narrative.
A very neat and maybe too simple narrative. This book flips the script. It focuses instead on the alienating effects of school practices.
Okay, alienating effects. What does that mean in practice? How does the book say students are alienated?
It's about the impact on their morale, their actual intellectual development, not just test scores, and their mental health. It's suggesting there's a human cost to this highly regimented system, even if it looks successful from the outside.
So how did they research this? What's the evidence base?
They use questionnaires, primarily, surveyed 549 Japanese secondary students, and interestingly, a much larger group in Australia, 2,038 students.
Quite a difference in sample size. Why so many more in Australia?
The book mentions it gives greater statistical reliability to the Australian findings. The Japanese sample was still considered robust enough for their analysis, though.
And where were these schools? Was there a mix?
Yeah, in Japan, it was 9 schools, mostly around Tokyo and Osaka, a mix of commercial and academic high schools, including some considered quite elite.
Okay.
And in Australia, 21 schools around Melbourne, again, a mix. Elite, private, state high schools, state technical schools, broad range.
So they weren't trying to find identical schools, but rather compare the overall systems.
Exactly. The aim was to build a typology, a framework for comparison.
Right.
Figure 2.1 in the book actually maps out the schools based on how many students aimed for university, just to show the distribution.
Got it. Now, a huge part of the discussion around Japanese education is always the meritocracy and the examination system.
Oh, absolutely central. Japan's often held up as, maybe the closest society to a true meritocracy, as Roland put it.
Yeah.
And the exam system is seen as the engine driving that.
And the book argues this system shapes basically everything for students.
Pretty much, yeah. School choice, curriculum, teaching style, how you're assessed, your behavior, family dynamics, your well-being. It touches everything.
The book uses an analogy,
Yeah.
like climate.
Yeah, that meritocracy is like the climate. It affects everything from the, quote, shape of houses to people's emotions and health. It's that fundamental.
But the book also pushes back on this idea of Japan being uniquely homogenous or perfectly egalitarian, doesn't it? Despite the whole 100 million middle class narrative.
It does. It cites work by people like Korea, showing that socioeconomic background still plays a huge role in educational outcomes.
How so?
Well, studies show top universities are dominated by kids from professional or managerial families. Parents' education levels strongly correlate with kids' grades and opportunities. Social class heavily influences which type of high school you even get into.
So the level playing field isn't quite level.
Not nearly as level as the popular image might suggest. There's data in the book, Table 2.4, showing fathers' education linked to school type. Kids from less educated backgrounds often end up in vocational schools, not the elite ones.
And Table 2.5.
That shows a strong link between socioeconomic background and school prestige in both Japan and Australia. So it's not uniquely Japanese, but it definitely undermines the pure meritocracy claim there too.
And the book mentions Takuchi's point that maybe academic credentials aren't paying off as much in jobs and economic status as they used to compared to other countries.
Right, the return on investment, so to speak, might be declining. And Takuchi also talks about the competition being overheated.
Overheated because?
Because the schools and universities are ranked so finely, so narrowly. There's this relentless pressure to aim just one rank higher because even small differences seem crucial in that rigid hierarchy.
That sounds incredibly stressful. Let's shift then to the student-teacher relationship. The book found Japanese school life more autocratic compared to Australia's more democratic feel.
Based on the student surveys, yes. And it suggests that control mechanisms have actually tightened in recent years in Japan.
How does it describe the typical relationship?
It uses terms like Frere's banking education teachers, depositing knowledge into passive students, or the jag and mug approach, very teacher-centered, almost forceful instruction.
Like a one-way street.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Information flows from teacher to student with not much room for dialogue or questioning.
It even connects this to Nakanishi's ideas about senior-junior relationships in Japanese society overall.
Exactly. Latondra's work suggests this hierarchy in schools reflects broader societal patterns of deference to seniority. It highlights that tension between universal educational theories and understanding Japan on its own terms.
And what do the students themselves say about talking to teachers?
Significantly harder in Japan, according to the surveys. Students found it much less easy to approach teachers with personal worries compared to Australian students.
Which aligns with what some critics like Kohama Itsuo have said about a communication breakdown.
Yes, Kohama talks about a lack of real human connection, that confiding in a teacher is almost unthinkable for many Japanese students.
But paradoxically, Japanese classrooms are often seen as more orderly.
Right, but the book implies this order might come at the cost of genuine connection and support. Australian students, despite perhaps more classroom disruption, felt more able to talk to their teachers personally.
The book mentions different teaching styles in Australia, too.
Yeah, citing Connell's research.
Yeah.
You had some teachers with a more authoritarian style, cheerful brutality, as one quote put it, but also others who were much more supportive, student-centered. Quotes from teachers and students illustrate that variety.
So, less uniform than perhaps the image of Japanese schools. The book also points to a historical shift in Japan, a move away from progressive ideas.
A slow but steady retreat is how it's phrased, over the last 50 years or so. Things like increased textbook censorship, more state control over curriculum, political influence on teacher evaluations.
And that 1995 reconciliation between the teachers' union, Nikioso, and the Ministry of Education, Manbusho, that was significant.
Seen by many as a turning point, maybe the end of the union's fight for a more democratic education, contrasting sharply with the post-war democratic push.
Whereas Australia, despite its own issues like budget cuts,
Still maintains more of a Western liberal democratic framework in its official policies, promoting participation, abolishing corporal punishment back in the 80s.
a key difference seems to be this idea of a united front in Japan. Teachers, classmates, even parents pressuring individual students.
Which can lead to silence, yeah. Students feeling they can't speak out.
Which might explain why the Tokokyohi students, the school refusers, are described as the most vocal.
Because they step outside the system and have time to reflect. Their experiences offer a really important counter-narrative. The surveys also showed Japanese students reported more dehumanizing treatment, yelling unfairness from teachers.
What about corporal punishment? The book hints it might be underreported.
Possibly, yeah. Fear of repercussions. And tragically, it links some extreme disciplinary actions, even deaths, to school practices. Cases like Totsuka Yacht School, Gifugio High School.
These aren't just isolated incidents, the book suggests.
It suggests they might stem from attitudes embedded within certain parts of the system, a traditional view that children need to be strictly controlled, even subdued.
There are examples of severe punishments, even leading to suicide.
Yes, like the case involving an athletic club coach. That emphasis on group unity in clubs can sometimes lead to collective punishment, too.
In certain regions, like Aichi and Chiba, are highlighted for being particularly regimented.
Yes, known for strictness. Even teacher recruitment there is sometimes based on personal connections, apparently. And there's closer school police cooperation, sharing info on problem kids.
The teachers' union is weaker there.
Right, Nikioso has a lot of influence in those conservative areas. And you have to remember the tough working conditions for teachers. Too long hours, little leave, the risk of karoshi, death by overwork. It's pressure all around.
And Chiba's close ties to the ministry reinforce that conservative climate.
Seems so. The book even mentions public schools cooperating with special homes that use violent rehabilitation methods.
And the law change allowing Kokyouri students to be sent to facilities for delinquents. That's blurring a really important line.
Absolutely. It frames school refusal almost as criminality. Maybe it's not surprising then that some surveys found Japanese junior high kids expressing a desire to hit their teachers.
Contrast that with Australia officially abandoning corporal punishment, though the book acknowledges discipline is still an issue there.
Of course. But the approach is different. And importantly, the order in Japanese classrooms isn't always spontaneous. There's inattentiveness, disruption, even student violence towards teachers sometimes. It's not a perfect system.
And the hierarchy affects teachers too, not just students.
Definitely. Non-managerial teachers can feel oppressed by the structure as well.
Okay, let's talk about the rules themselves. The web of regimentation. The book gives an example of a student, Nakajima Ryu, trying to discuss rules.
And getting completely shut down by the teacher. It highlights the non-negotiable nature of many rules. Table 5.2 shows far fewer Japanese students felt rules were explained well compared to Australians.
The short hair rule for boys is used as a key symbol.
Yeah, symbolizing forced obedience, loss of individuality, even dehumanization.
And students policing each other, sometimes more strictly than teachers.
That happens too, yes. Seniors enforcing rules on juniors. Interestingly, while many Japanese students said teachers sometimes let them have a say in classroom rules,
The book sees that differently.
it frames it more as a way to get students to internalize the existing rules, not genuine co-creation. Unlike in Australia, where most students reported no such involvement.
And the power teachers have through those confidential reports, that looms large.
Huge leverage. It can potentially silence students who might otherwise question things, because it affects their future so directly.
Australian students also disliked pointless rules, but seemed to accept the need for some structure.
Right. They resented nonsensical rules, but recognized schools need organization. The crucial difference, the book argues, is the feeling among Japanese students.
Which was?
A desperate desire to be freed from the rules. Not a single Japanese student in the survey wished for stricter rules, unlike some Australians who might want more order. It was about liberation.
Okay, let's move to academic pressure. Tables 6.4 and 6.5 show pressure is high in both places, especially around exams.
Yes, exams are stressful everywhere. But the nature of the pressure seems different in Japan, according to the book.
So?
It argues school knowledge in Japan has become almost entirely reduced to examination knowledge over the last few decades.
Just stuff you need for the test.
Pretty much. Leading to cynicism among students about the actual value or relevance of what they're learning. It becomes absurdly specialized.
Like the example of native English speakers being sidelined if they don't focus on exam-specific English.
Exactly. Or the comments from students in Yobiko, the cram schools, about just learning techniques for English and math exams.
So knowledge becomes a commodity for the examination industry.
That's Horio's term, yeah. Students become consumers, valuing teachers who deliver the goods for exams.
Table 6.6 and 6.7 compared difficulty and relevance.
Right. Both found schoolwork difficult. But Table 6.7 shows Japanese students found it significantly less relevant to their lives, more meaningless.
And this meaninglessness might make other alienating aspects harder to tolerate.
Potentially, yes. The book sees this as the end product of policies from decades ago, equating school with exams, specialization, standardization, knowledge as a commodity, students as consumers.
Textbooks play a role too. Standardizing thought.
And censorship reinforces that. The 1989 new course of study is cited as intensifying nationalistic policies, compulsory flag anthem, more moral education, intensified textbook screening. Takayama Yoji called it war education.
Table 6.8 directly measures meaninglessness of study.
And finds Japanese students score much higher on that scale. Though interestingly, Table 6.9 on preparation for the future is more mixed. It's complex.
So how do students respond to all this? Conformity, obviously, but also resistance, ijime, bullying, and Tokyoki, school refusal.
Right. The book uses the tragic suicide of Shikagawa Hirofumi linked to severe regime as a stark example. That case led to unprecedented discipline against teachers.
Did things change after that? Did the anti-bullying measures work?
Some measures were introduced, but the book argues regime remains a persistent, perhaps more severe issue in Japan compared to elsewhere, citing Kawai.
And it's hard to study accurately with questionnaires.
Because people have reasons to stay silent. Students, teachers, parents. Fukuda Hiroyuki's experience trying to address it in his class was revealing.
What did he find?
A belief among some students that differences justify bullying. Power dynamics are key. Bully-victim roles can shift, and having an audience makes it worse.
Teachers feel powerless, or even side with bullies sometimes.
Both scenarios are mentioned. There's that awful account of a teacher ignoring bullying, then siding with the bully in the fight afterwards, the second Shikagawa comment.
And victims don't report it.
Often not. Fear of revenge, skepticism about teachers helping. Kobayashi's survey supports this. It goes back to that distant student-teacher relationship.
Canby Tomoko's quote about learning just to study the textbook and conform, that sums up the pressure.
It really does. And the pressure isn't just top-down. It's fierce from classmates. Hard to be different. The pressure to be futsu ordinary is intense. The homeroom system probably contributes.
Tokyo students often talk about losing themselves in that environment.
Yes, like Kurita Takako. Some even see ijime as a twisted coping mechanism for the stress in that confined space. Limited outlets outside school don't help.
The book calls ijime overconformity aimed at erasing individuality kokeshi.
A powerful way to put it, yes.
Yeah.
And to Kokyohi's the opposite, resistance withdrawal.
And there are many more Tokyo students than official stats show.
A reserve army, the book suggests, citing various studies. The official view often pathologizes the school phobia, apathy syndrome.
But the book challenges that psychiatric framing.
It presents case studies suggesting those interpretations can be problematic, sometimes leading to treatments in mental hospitals that seem more about adjustment than addressing the school issues.
And the idea of solving it with more discipline,
Hmm.
retraining centers,
Right.
reformatories.
Sadly, yes. That approach exists using harsh methods. Sometimes parents push kids hard to go back until they have this painful realization their child genuinely needs to stop.
The book includes accounts from parents about that moment.
Heartbreaking ones, yes, describing the extreme pressure kids are under and that moment of awakening for the parents.
And the students themselves. They feel guilty at first.
Huge internal conflict. But gradually, many realize not going to school doesn't make them no good. Watanabe Madoka's insight is key. Accepting herself allowed her to dislike school.
So Tokyo can actually lead to self-discovery, finding a voice.
It can, yes. Like Ishwari Minako expressing disagreement. Many criticize the system for crushing individuality.
And when they return, they see the school environment differently, as abnormal.
That shock of reentry is common. Some even decide quitting school is the path to becoming normal. The book views Tokyo-e as a quest for identity against imposed roles. So wrapping it up, the alienating school knowledge, instrumental, specialized, commodified, fits into this larger picture of control, nationalism, corporate needs, and students just trying to survive and maximize opportunities.
A super control model using symbolic, coercive, instrumental controls.
Exactly. It leaves students exhausted, burnt out. Tokyo becomes this painful process of de-alienation. Both Ijime and Tokyo are seen as raw resistance.
And when it feels like life or death, talk of high standards based on test scores seems beside the point.
Absolutely meaningless in that context. The book draws that final parallel between Tokyo students and the school killer, both resistors, outsiders grappling with subjectivity.
But with vastly different outcomes.
Crucially different. Tokyo holds potential for positive, constructive power self-discovery. The killer's power was destructive. Language and sympathy are key, the book argues, to channeling that resistance positively. Table 9.1 summarizes those alienating factors well.
Okay, so to recap this deep dive, we've explored a view of the Japanese high school system marked by intense control and pressure.
Leading to really serious issues like Ijime and Tokyo, which this analysis presents as forms of student resistance, especially stark when compared with a system like Australia's.
Yeah, the big takeaway for me, learner, is realizing these aren't just isolated problems. They're deeply tangled up with the system's history, its structure, that whole high-stakes meritocracy thing.
Which leaves us with a pretty challenging final thought, doesn't it? Given everything discussed, how do societies strike that balance? The need for structure and achievement versus the absolute necessity of student well-being, individuality, critical thinking.
And what happens long-term when that balance gets thrown way off?
Exactly. Something to definitely keep thinking about.